Hello and welcome to this video on everything wrong with the opening of Resident Evil from 2002. This is a movie that started a franchise that seems unable to die, much like its zombies. However, the whole franchise should not have happened, as the opening has all kinds of issues with the way they've designed the set, if it were real, or even remotely accurate to real life. This is much like the opening of Outbreak, except they had years to do a better job. Let's walk through the start of Resident Evil and identify all the problems that should have stopped this from ever being a thing, let alone a whole franchise of movies. First, we have the whole use of a hazmat suit for externally controlled robot arms in an isolated room. This is unnecessary, and it will be absolutely horrible. Those inflated suits are hot, sweaty, and unpleasant, and are not worn except when needed. Given that this should theoretically be a biosafety level 4 laboratory, they should be wearing them right throughout, but as you'll see, that's definitely not the case. So, in this case, they're not needed, we assume, based on the design and the fact that it's technically isolated and separate due to the use of robotic arms. Essentially, because the samples are isolated in another room, you could make a case that the laboratory, in terms of the open working space, doesn't need to abide by the same strict levels of contamination, or biocontainment perhaps. What you have is basically like a biocontainment box or a glove box, just fancier and arguably safer. Much safer, as there's no risk of broken seams, rubber seals, or gloves breaking, leading to exposure risks. This is not to say that it's good, just that it is arguably safer and better. But things get weird. Why they have the weird biocontainment box followed by the second containment box without the externally supplied air is odd. Normally the suit would be attached to a central line that pumps air in so as to avoid issues of breathing air full of any possible pathogens. It also creates a positive pressure inside the suit, which makes it look like the Michelin Man, inflated like a donut. Why this is important is that it means that it should, if there's any damage to the suit, force air out, meaning no pathogens get inside, and you have an opportunity to escape. But no, there's also no obvious battery on the suit, which means that there's no local system that should keep it pressurized. Next we have the weird choice of containers. The vials used make no sense beyond being aesthetically creepy and sciencey. Samples like this are nearly always kept in either frozen media, such as dry ice, that keep them at a temperature well below 0 degrees Celsius. This is often as close as the lab can get to negative 7 degrees Celsius, or at least negative 20. Second, the vials are nearly always microcentrifuge tubes, falcon tubes, or similar tubes. This is just weird double helix crap. Unnecessarily so. Looks cool, but unnecessary. The reason for what is used is standardized sizing and format. Easy to transport, easy to handle, and there are nearly always a way to get racks and stands for use with them. Further, nearly all machines in a lab, like centrifuge, PCR, shakers, etc., are all designed with these in mind. Essentially, the tubes that are normally found in a lab are practically standardized across every laboratory. The Umbrella Corporation would have needed to have custom-made every bit of kit used for these vials in that lab. There's just no way for them to work otherwise. You could not use them in any piece of standard equipment ever made in the last 250 years. Further, the vials are nearly never color-coded like this. They are written in texter. Every lab starts out with a pile of texters, at least to start with, and these texters magically disappear, and people start hoarding their texters so they can label everything as needed with dates, sample, the contents of the vial, typically, the person who made it, and so on. And they basically hoard their texters to be able to do so. Not color coding for this as a virus, and this is the cure. Further, you don't transport the pathogen and vaccine together with a syringe gun. Not like this anyway. The syringe gun would be fine without the steel box. The steel box itself is weird, but we'll get to that. The vials, however, they need to meet certain transport standards. In a very broad sense, it is at least two different boxes, with the inner box being the cold box and some sort of padding, along with the cooling material like dry ice. And then more padding around this inner box in between it and the outer box. Then you have, obviously, the outer box. And then you might even have some overly complicated steel protection like they do, but that's typically the last line. You would also need all of the biohazard warnings under the sun. Things like, this is a dangerous pathogenic virus, don't touch. What is the treatment for it? And a whole bunch of other conditions that are always required whenever transporting some sort of biohazardous material. Biohazard containment rooms, isolation chambers, glove boxes, etc. don't work the way they're shown either. In the case of highly virulent samples, like the T virus, that could cause and will cause human harm, they go in via a chute-like tunnel. The door on one side is opened, the sample goes in, the door closes. You typically try and evacuate the air from it so that no air from the other side of the chute, let's say, ever gets into the other side. Then the door on the other side opens and you can take the sample out. This means there's no risk of spread of any kind. Instead, all they've done here is have some weird automated door open up. That's not how this works. In fact, what it does look like is a fume hood used for chemistry, which is very different. They are meant to stop you from dying due to exposure to dangerous fumes, for the most part, by drawing air away through filters and exiting it to the outside world. Actual biohazard containment hoods are very different, and frankly, we won't go through that. There's an entire video dedicated to what they should be doing in various ways and broken up into different bits and pieces, such as what is a physical containment lab, what is a biosafety level. You'll find a link to those in the top corner. Suffice to say that this is not how any of it should be working at this point. Further, we have to ask, where does the extra vial come from? You know, the one they throw and break that starts this whole thing off? From what we can see, they were all in the box. There was nothing external to the box when they opened it up, so where did this spare vial come from? Even if we were to ignore that the box was sealed, it was in the same biohazard compartment as the virus vials were open in. This means it would be contaminated to some extent, yet the person throwing the vial is wearing regular standard lab gloves and regular clothes. They should be exposed, or at least at risk of exposure. In fact, we would argue, given how easily the virus seems to spread, they should have been infected. There's little debate on that, that's just factual at this point. Next we have the weird thing where the virus is aerosolizing already. A lab is kept at either cold temperature or at STP, standard temperature and pressure. STP is 20 degrees Celsius and 1 atmosphere. There is no way that the virus sublimates and gets turned into vapor or gas at that temperature unless it's designed to do so, which would mean it's weaponized already, which seems unlikely but possibly true. The only other way that this happens, and this would be part of the weaponization process, is if you use chemicals likely to destroy the virus to make it possible for it to aerosolize at lower temperatures. If we assume that for whatever reason this was true anyway, the air is going in the wrong direction. Labs that work with dangerous pathogens are going to be at least physical containment level 2 and arguably higher, like physical containment level 4. That means negative pressure in the lab, or in simpler terms, air always flows towards the lab, not away. That makes sure that exactly what happens here with a pathogen escaping cannot happen. Cannot, full stop. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. In terms of air, can the air get out to allow a pathogen to spread? Even if, for some miraculous reason, the air circulation system failed, a PC2 lab should not be sharing any common ductwork with anywhere or anything else. It is isolated to the lab to again stop this from happening. It should be physically impossible to have the virus escape the lab into common work areas like that shown. You might argue that, well, Umbrella Corporation does not care, and fair enough, but the designs are practically standardized. That is, any competent designer, architect, whatever they used, will refer to things like physical containment levels and design accordingly. Not so much for the compliance reasons, as it is simply that they will tell you what is needed to make a lab work. In effect, what sort of ventilation do you need? What sort of provision for sinks, showers, safety stuff? All the standard things that, even if Umbrella Corporation is truly evil, would still have provided in order to ensure their staff can work. It's kind of like a recipe. but one that keeps people from dying. You can vary it and make changes, but the basics remain the same, no matter what else you do, which means basic safety levels remain still there. And next we have elevators. Elevators have almost since inception contained mechanical locks that an AI would not be able to interact with. These are physically there to prevent accidents from happening despite any other variables. The Red Queen cannot turn off the mechanical brakes that are meant to stop exactly what is happening from happening. That is, let's say, simply put, that no matter what else happens, these physical brakes stop what is occurring from occurring. It's why elevators are surprisingly safe, all things said and done. Also, that's not where the brakes are located, and not how they work. Next we have the other laboratory scene, not the one where the vial is being stolen. Instead, this is when they're entering the laboratory to begin working, the 3 staff. This lab actually sort of looks like it may have followed the rules now. The double door thing is to create an airlock, not like a submarine or, say, deep-sea diving airlock. Instead, we mean to ensure that air is in the lab, stays in the lab, and air from outside comes in only. However, this laboratory has bigger problems. Much, much bigger problems. The scientists are terrible at their job. They have left specimens partially dissected on the bench. This is a problem. You need to not just collect your samples, but store them as soon as possible. Typically, this can be done by dropping them into your tubes, such as microtubes, Falcon tubes, or any other storage surrounded by dry ice, to try and freeze them almost right away. It takes a little bit of time, but with the use of dry ice, they're freezing fairly quickly. Ideally, you have something like saline with a buffer solution to ensure the tissues are reasonably buffered and protected during the freezing process and don't dry out or do weird shit. Alternatively, a liquid nitrogen flash freeze the samples you are taking. The need for this is to avoid the samples beginning to degrade. Leaving a specimen on the bench is not just going to ruin the sample collection, which means you can't rely on any data you get from this, but it's also a biohazard. You leaving a biohazard in your bench is a good way to get yelled at by the PI, the OH&S rep, or anyone else who knows what they're doing. Not only that, but there are no storage options available anyway. They seem to have just killed a rabbit for the sake of seeing if there were any gross anatomical changes. By gross we mean large scale, not disgusting or similar. So there's no obvious reason for this rabbit to have been euthanized, culled, or however you wish to describe it, just for them to start cutting into it. Also, why is the virus multiplying in the air without a host? There is a need for viruses to have some kind of host to multiply. If they were saying the concentration is going up, there should be a reason for that given how much time has expired since the vial was broken, and presumably given the rate at which it was spreading, it's completely gone by that point, and the time in which this is saying, oh no, it's increasing anyway. That's not a consistent pattern. Then again, we're expecting consistency from a Resident Evil movie. They're not exactly well known for it. And then we have the workers who again failed to follow basic lab safety. You do not bring food, drink, or similar into a laboratory. This is a perfect example of why. You can contaminate yourself with things that are in the air and on surfaces. It's like brushing your teeth with your toilet brush after using it to clean the toilet. Dumb and dangerous. Further, you don't put the cup of coffee next to the fucking half-dissected rabbit. Do you want to be drinking random bodily fluids, bits of dissected flesh and similar? Because this is how you end up drinking random bodily fluids and bits of random dissected flesh. The last guy even brought in a plate of food, presuming he's not going to start eating the rabbit. There is no decontamination facilities, no obvious sinks, showers, or any other OH&S requirements. Yet the virus only escaped after the vial was shattered. Yeah. Further to everything else we've just mentioned, animal care is subpar at best and probably not up to even basic standards. Research animals are not kept in front of the dissection table in a good lab. In fact, they're kept quite a ways away from wherever you're going to be doing whatever it is you're doing. So not only do they lack the necessary light-dark cycles, if kept where they are, but they are also, well, to be honest with you, are going to be very stressed by the rest of what you are doing. It's like basically being in a cage and watching the butcher prepare someone else who's in the cage next to you to be eaten. It's not ideal, and it's not what any good lab does to avoid issues around stress affecting results. As for the water in the lab, most labs will contain some sort of flawed drainage. This is to solve the issue of spills, and to ensure you can clean up appropriately. Now, the drainage may not be pronounced, but it should be enough that if you start to turn a, in this case, sealed lab, into a pool, the water will drain away. That should prevent a rogue AI creating a lab-sized swimming pool. Finally, what the hell did the Red Queen use to kill everyone? Halon gas seems to be the answer based on the screenshot, but that is a very questionable solution. And not just has the oxygen not decreased overall, it just makes a lower percentage available, but also halon is not deadly at the initial exposure levels like this. Halon gas, which is also called bromotrifluoromethane, at least for halon 1301, which is one of the more common fire suppressants used, or bromochlorodyfluoromethane for halon 1211, are generally considered safe, or at least low in toxicity, for humans under normal conditions, such as brief exposures during fire suppression. However, at higher concentrations or during prolonged exposure, and this is definitely not prolonged exposure, they can cause adverse health effects. This is primarily driven by oxygen displacement or toxicological effects. It's important to note that you need much more than roughly 30 seconds of exposure. It is true that at higher concentrations, halon will displace oxygen in the air, potentially leading to asphyxiation. A concentration of about 15% or more can reduce oxygen levels below what is needed to sustain normal respiration. Typically, just under 20% oxygen is considered safe, which, funnily enough, it's only once you hit 19 or so percent that people start dying in this scene, which means they're dying when the oxygen level's still considered safe, which is definitely not right. In terms of lethality, well, there is a lethal concentration, the LC50. The data on halon gases is limited, but most animal studies would say that the lethal concentration, which is when half subjects die, for halon 1301 is extremely high, around 80% by volume, for short-term exposure, and that's way above any typical level that's used. Again, Red Queen and being a homicidal AI is a different matter. And halon 1211 has a lower number, around 13 to 32% depending on exposure time. In short, everybody died much too soon in this scene, and in the wrong way for what it is. Yeah. Overall, the start of the entire Resident Evil movie franchise should have been very different. It is entirely possible and reasonable to say that a viral outbreak may have happened, but it requires the Red Queen not act to seal the laboratory before the staff enter, which should have happened. That the design of the laboratory remains completely flawed the way it is. That the staff enter and get infected with T-virus, and then leave it to communicate it to outside individuals beyond the laboratory. This would allow for that office to come infected. There are ways it could work, if we assume that's true, just not any of the methods shown in the movie, which is a problem because it undermines everything that follows for the next roughly 20 years of movies. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, and please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.